Hello, and welcome. Before we begin our journey into the dark Gothic streets of Yharnam, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? Are you tucked into bed in a quiet room, perhaps with rain pattering against your window? Or maybe you're lying in the darkness, hoping these words will guide you gently into sleep. Wherever you are, you're welcome here. Take a deep breath, settle in. Let the world outside fade away. Tonight, we're going to explore one of the most hauntingly beautiful and intricate stories ever told in gaming, the complete lore of Bloodborne. This is a tale of ancient civilizations, cosmic horrors, forbidden knowledge, and the tragic cycle of humanity's ambition. It's a story told not through cutscenes or exposition dumps, but through item descriptions, environmental storytelling, and cryptic dialogue. It's a puzzle box of narrative that has captivated players since 2015, and tonight we're going to piece it all together. But don't worry about following every detail. This isn't a test. This is a journey meant to wash over you like a dark lullaby. Let the words carry you. If you drift away, that's perfect. If you find yourself fascinated and awake, that's wonderful too. There's no right way to experience this. We'll travel back thousands of years to the Ancient Pthumerian Civilization, forward to the founding of the Healing Church, through the descent into beasthood and madness, and finally to the cosmic revelation that changes everything. We'll meet hunters and scholars, gods and monsters, victims and villains, though you'll find the line between them is often blurred beyond recognition. So close your eyes if you'd like. Let the tension drain from your shoulders, and let me tell you a story about a night of the hunt that never ends, about blood that promises healing but delivers damnation, and about the terrible price of seeking eyes on the inside. Chapter 1. The Ancient Origins, Thumeru and the Great Ones. Long before Yharnam existed, before the Healing Church rose to power, before humanity even understood what it meant to seek knowledge beyond the mortal realm, there was Thumeru. The Thumerian Civilization flourished in an age so ancient that by the time our story properly begins, they exist only as shadows, as echoes, as the guardians of labyrinths buried so deep beneath the earth that sunlight becomes a distant memory. The Thumerians were not like the humans who had come after them. They were different, taller, gaunt, with pale skin that seemed to have never known the sun. They built their civilization in the depths, in vast underground chambers and sprawling catacombs that would later be called the Chalice Dungeons. These weren't merely burial sites or primitive dwellings. They were architectural marvels, ritual spaces, and repositories of secrets that would drive later scholars to madness. But what made the Thumerians truly significant wasn't their architecture or their society. It was what they discovered. Deep in their explorations of the underground labyrinths, the Thumerians made contact with something that should have remained unknown. They found the Great Ones. The Great Ones are beings of cosmic significance, entities that exist on a plane of reality beyond human comprehension. They are not gods in the traditional sense. They don't demand worship or answer prayers in predictable ways. They simply are. They exist in dimensions that intersect with our own in ways that defy physical laws. To perceive them properly requires something the game calls insight, a form of cosmic awareness that allows one to see the truth of reality, though that truth is often more horrifying than comforting. These Great Ones have motivations, but they're alien to human understanding. One desire, however, seems universal among them. They long for children. This becomes a crucial thread throughout Bloodborne's entire narrative. The Great Ones, for reasons never fully explained, struggle to produce offspring. Every great one loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. This simple, almost sympathetic desire becomes the engine of tragedy for countless souls throughout the story. The Thumerians didn't merely observe these beings, they formed a relationship with them. They developed rituals, ceremonies, and above all they discovered the power of blood. Not ordinary blood, but blood infused with the essence of the Great Ones themselves. This blood had properties that seemed miraculous. It could heal wounds, cure diseases, extend life, and grant power beyond mortal limits. The Thumerians began a practice that would echo through the ages: blood ministration. They used special chalices in their rituals, cups that would become legendary artifacts in the ages to come. Through these chalices and through their communion with the Great Ones, the Thumerians achieved wonders, but they also paid a price. You see, the blood of the Great Ones is transformative, but not in predictable ways. It changes those who receive it, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. The Thumerians began to change. Some became more than human, ascending to something higher. Others descended into something bestial, monstrous. The very first seeds of the Scourge of Beasts were planted in these ancient times, in these deep places, by a civilization reaching for divinity. Among the Thumerians there were leaders, queens and royalty who presided over the most important rituals. Queen Yharnam herself, pregnant and magnificent, became a central figure in Thumerian religion. Her role in the communion with the Great Ones was paramount, and her image would be revered long after Thumerian civilization fell into ruin. But what happened to the Thumerians? Why did their great civilization collapse, leaving only these underground tombs? The answer is both simple and complex. The same forces that gave them power ultimately consumed them. The communion with Great Ones exacted a toll. The transformations accelerated, the beasts multiplied, and perhaps most significantly, the Great Ones themselves proved to be indifferent to the suffering their presence caused. By the time the Thumerians fade from history, their cities are tomb cities, patrolled by undead guardians who continue their ancient duties long after the purpose has been forgotten. The chalices remain, scattered and hidden, waiting to be discovered by those curious or foolish enough to seek them out. And those who would eventually find these chalices, who would explore these dungeons and uncover these secrets, would set in motion the entire tragedy of Bloodborne. Because humanity, it seems, is doomed to repeat the mistakes of those who came before. The scholars of Byrgenwerth would make the same discoveries, draw the same conclusions, and suffer the same consequences, just in a different age, in a different place, with new players in an ancient game. The Thumerians left behind more than ruins and chalices. They left a blueprint for ascension, a path to transcendence through blood and ritual. And that path would be followed again, with disastrous results, by the Healing Church of Yharnam. Chapter 2: The Healing Church in Byrgenwerth. Our story now moves forward through time to an era of gas lamps and Gothic architecture, of Victorian sensibilities meeting ancient horrors. We come to the city of Yharnam, a jewel of civilization built unknowingly atop the ruins of Thumerian. And in this city, at a college called Byrgenwerth, scholars gathered to push back the boundaries of human knowledge. Byrgenwerth was a place of learning, perched beside a great lake, isolated enough for serious study. It wasn't a large institution, this wasn't a sprawling university, but it attracted some of the keenest minds of the age. and among these scholars 2 men stand out as the architects of everything that would follow: Master Willem and his student, Laurence. Master Willem was an old man even when our story begins in earnest, a scholar of profound intelligence and caution. He believed that humanity's evolution, its transcendence beyond the limitations of mortal flesh, could be achieved through insight, through gaining eyes on the inside, as he would put it. Knowledge, understanding, cosmic awareness, these were the keys to human evolution. He coined a phrase that would haunt the narrative: fear the old blood. This warning from Willem is crucial to understanding the entire tragedy of Bloodborne. He recognized the danger in the very thing that others would see as salvation, but his student Laurence would not heed this warning. Laurence was younger, more ambitious, and less patient than his master. Where Willem counselled caution and intellectual pursuit, Laurence saw an opportunity for immediate change, for tangible results. And what Laurence discovered, what the scholars of Byrgenwerth discovered together, would change everything. The scholars had been exploring the ruins beneath their college, delving into the old labyrinths that connected to the ancient Pthumerian depths, and in these explorations they found the old blood. They found evidence of the Great Ones. They found proof that the Thumerians had achieved something remarkable through blood ministration. But more than that, they found something, or someone, still alive in those depths. They found Ebrietas, daughter of the cosmos, a great one left behind or abandoned in the old Thumerian labyrinths. Ebrietas would become central to the healing church's later communion with the Great Ones. But at this moment of discovery, she represented proof that these beings existed, proof that contact was possible, proof that transcendence wasn't just a myth. The scholars of Byrgenwerth also explored the fishing hamlet by the sea, but we'll return to that tragedy later. For now, what matters is that they had found the key to something profound, and opinions differed sharply on what to do with this knowledge. Willem argued for restraint. He wanted to continue studying, to understand before acting, to evolve through insight rather than physical transformation. He began his experiments with lining the brain with eyes, seeking to grant his followers the vision to perceive higher planes of existence. This is why you encounter those strange patients in his college, their heads grotesquely swollen, literally lined with eyes inside their skulls. Willem was trying to grant them sight beyond sight, but the results were at best mixed. Laurence disagreed with his master's approach. He believed the old blood was the answer, not something to be feared, but something to be harnessed. He believed that through careful blood ministration, humanity could be healed, strengthened, and elevated. He looked at the Thumerians not as a cautionary tale, but as proof of concept. The schism between master and student deepened until finally Laurence left Byrgenwerth. He didn't leave alone. He took other scholars with him, true believers in his vision, and he took something else. A pendant, a skull of some significant beast, which Master Willem would long for even decades later. But most importantly, Laurence took the knowledge of the old blood and the determination to use it. Laurence returned to Yharnam and founded the Healing Church. The Healing Church began, perhaps with good intentions. Laurence and his followers set themselves up as medical practitioners and spiritual leaders. They established grand cathedrals and workshops. They developed a system of blood ministration that they offered to the sick and dying. And it worked. The blood healed, the blood cured, the blood gave strength to the weak and vitality to the dying. The church's power grew rapidly. people flocked to receive blood ministration. The church became the most powerful institution in Yharnam, controlling not just spiritual matters but medical practice, politics, and eventually every aspect of life in the city. They established different branches and orders within the church, each with specialized roles. There was the main clergy, who administered blood ministration and maintained the rituals. There were the healing church hunters, warriors trained to protect the church and its secrets. And as the church grew in power and knowledge, they established more secretive orders, the choir, the school of Mensis, and others who pursued increasingly esoteric research. But Master Willem's warning would prove prophetic. Fear the old blood, because the blood that healed also transformed, the blood that cured also cursed, and the price of the healing church's miracle would be paid in full in a currency of blood and beasts and madness. The first signs of trouble appeared gradually. Some patients who received blood ministration began to change. Nothing dramatic at first, just increased aggression, strange appetites, unusual growth. But these symptoms progressed. The transformations accelerated, and eventually the terrible truth became unavoidable. The old blood was turning people into beasts. Not everyone transformed, and those who did changed at different rates and to different degrees. The process seemed to be influenced by multiple factors: the amount of blood received, the individual's constitution, their mental state, and perhaps most insidiously, their own fears and inner darkness. The beast was not just a physical transformation, but a psychological one, a surrender to base instincts and violent urges. The healing church faced a crisis of their own making. The very treatment they had offered as salvation was creating monsters. But rather than admit their error, rather than cease blood ministration, the church chose a different path. They would manage the problem. They would control it. They would hunt the beasts while continuing to offer the blood to new patients. This decision to continue blood ministration while secretly hunting those it transformed is the core hypocrisy that damns the healing church. They knew the truth. They understood the cost. But they continued anyway, because to stop would mean admitting their entire foundation was built on a mistake. It would mean losing their power, their influence, their control over Yharnam. So the church established the hunters officially, creating workshops where special weapons were designed specifically for killing beasts. They developed a cover story. This Scourge of Beasts was a plague, yes, but one that could be managed. The hunts became ritualized, conducted at night, with ordinary citizens instructed to lock their doors and pray while the hunters did their bloody work. And through it all, blood ministration continued. The church kept seeking more sources of old blood, kept experimenting with different variants, kept trying to find a way to gain the benefits without the beastly costs. They delved deeper into communion with the Great Ones, seeking wisdom, seeking power, seeking a solution that would let them have their miracle without the accompanying curse. But the Great Ones do not think like humans. They do not care about human welfare in any meaningful sense. They exist on a different plane, with different concerns, and the more the church tried to commune with them, the deeper into darkness they fell. Laurence, the founder of the healing church, would eventually suffer the fate he had unleashed on others. In his later years, consumed by the very blood he had championed, he would transform into a horrific beast, a cleric beast of immense size and power, wreathed in flames. His transformation is symbolic of the entire church's fall. The man who defied his master's warning, who believed he could control the old blood, became perhaps the most tragic victim of his own hubris. But the church did not fall immediately. They endured for years, decades even, maintaining their power through secrecy, through propaganda, through the promise that the next discovery would solve everything. And in their laboratories and their grand cathedrals, they continued their experiments, their rituals, their communion with forces beyond human comprehension. Master Willem, alone in his college by the lake, watched his fears come true. He watched his students' grand plans spiral into nightmare. But even Willem couldn't stop what had been set in motion. The old blood had been let loose upon Yharnam, and nothing, no amount of insight, no amount of regret, no amount of wisdom gained too late, could put it back. Chapter 3. The Scourge of Beasts begins. The transformation of Yharnam from a city of healing into a city of monsters didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual descent, a slow corruption that spread through the population like a contagion, which, in many ways, it was. But it was a contagion of the church's own making, and the story of how they dealt with it reveals the depths of their moral compromise. The early transformations were isolated incidents. A patient here, a priest there, someone who had received particularly potent blood ministration or multiple treatments. These first beasts were tragic more than terrifying, people losing themselves to animal instincts, their bodies warping into lupine or canine forms, their humanity slipping away behind yellow eyes and slavering jaws. The Healing Church's initial response was to handle these cases quietly. The afflicted were taken away, isolated, hidden from public view. The Church maintained that these were aberrations, rare side effects that could be managed. They assured the public that blood ministration was still safe, still beneficial, still the miracle it had always been. But the transformations continued. They accelerated, and they began to show patterns that horrified the church scholars who studied them. The blood wasn't just transforming bodies, it was transforming minds. It was bringing out something primal, something bestial that lurked beneath the veneer of civilization in every human heart. Fear seemed to accelerate the process. So did rage, violence, and bloodlust. The more someone gave in to their animal instincts, the faster they transformed. It was as if the blood responded to the darkness within, amplifying it, making it physically manifest. This realization was damning because it suggested that the scourge wasn't just a medical problem, it was a spiritual and moral one. Everyone who received the blood carried the potential for transformation. Everyone in Yharnam was potentially a beast in waiting, and there was no way to predict who would transform or when. The situation in Old Yharnam illustrates how catastrophically wrong things went. Old Yharnam was once a thriving district of the city, home to thousands of people. When the Scourge of Beasts became particularly severe there, when transformations multiplied and the infected outnumbered the healthy, the Healing Church made a decision that would haunt them forever. They decided to contain the outbreak through the most brutal means possible. They burned Old Yharnam to the ground. The operation was carried out by the Healing Church hunters and a group known as the Powder Kegs, craftsmen and warriors who specialized in creating explosive weapons and artillery. They sealed the exits from Old Yharnam and then systematically set the entire district ablaze. Men, women, children, beast and human alike, all were consumed in the flames. The church's justification was containment. They couldn't allow the scourge to spread beyond Old Yharnam, so they sacrificed that district to save the rest of the city. But the truth was more complicated and more horrible. Many of those who burned were not beasts at all. They were simply residents of Old Yharnam, guilty only of living in the wrong district at the wrong time. The church killed them preemptively, fearing they might transform, choosing murder over the risk of further infection. This atrocity accomplished its immediate goal. Old Yharnam was sterilized. But it failed in every other respect. The scourge didn't stop. It continued to appear in other districts, in other neighborhoods, proving that the problem couldn't be contained geographically. The beasts were everywhere, because the blood was everywhere. The burning of Old Yharnam also created enemies for the church. One hunter in particular, Gehrman, had participated in the burning but came to regret it deeply. He returned to the ruins of Old Yharnam and took up a self-appointed vigil there, protecting the beasts that still roamed the charred district. Gehrman came to see the beasts not as monsters but as victims, as people who didn't deserve the additional cruelty of being hunted in their afflicted state. His change of heart represents a more compassionate response to the scourge, but one that the church couldn't afford to adopt without admitting their own guilt. As the scourge continued, the healing church adapted their strategy. They couldn't contain it through burning. There weren't enough hunters to burn every infected district. Instead, they established the hunt as a permanent institution. The hunt became ritualized, almost ceremonial. On nights when the scourge seemed particularly active, bells would ring throughout Yharnam, and citizens would be instructed to lock themselves indoors, to hide behind bolted doors and barricaded windows. The hunters would then take to the streets, roaming through the darkness, killing any beast they found. But the hunt became corrupted by its own logic. As the scourge worsened, as more and more people transformed or showed signs of transformation, the definition of what constituted a beast became more flexible. Hunters began killing the sick, the suspicious, anyone who exhibited behavior that might suggest early transformation. The hunt became less about protecting people and more about culling them. The mob mentality that developed is evident in every corner of Yharnam you explore in the game. The citizens, driven mad by fear and blood-drunk themselves from countless blood ministrations, became as dangerous as the beasts they feared. They hunt in packs, wielding pitchforks and torches, killing anything that seems wrong or different or threatening. They've internalized the logic of the hunt so completely that they've become monsters themselves, not physically transformed, but morally compromised, their humanity eroded by constant fear and violence. The healing church, meanwhile, retreated ever deeper into their cathedral and their research. They couldn't solve the scourge through conventional means, so they sought solutions in increasingly esoteric directions. They intensified their communion with the Great Ones. They sought out more sources of old blood. They experimented on their own clergy, on orphans, on anyone they could justify sacrificing in the name of finding a cure. Different factions within the church pursued different strategies. The choir, the highest-ranking members of the church, focused on transcendence, trying to elevate humanity beyond the physical form that was so susceptible to beasthood. The school of Mensis, a more radical offshoot, attempted to make direct contact with the Great Ones through dangerous rituals. The Healing Church workshops continued designing new weapons, new tools for the hunt, trying to create the perfect beast-slaying armament, but nothing worked. The scourge continued to spread. The nights of the hunt grew longer and more frequent. The gap between hunt night and normal night shrank until they became indistinguishable. Yharnam was effectively in a constant state of hunt, a city at war with itself, consuming its own population in a futile attempt to burn out an infection that lived in their very blood. The tragedy of the Scourge of Beasts is that it was entirely preventable. If the Healing Church had heeded Master Willem's warning, if they had shown restraint, if they had stopped blood ministration when the first transformations appeared, the catastrophe could have been avoided. But institutions don't easily admit fault, especially when admitting fault means losing power. So the church continued, and Yharnam descended ever deeper into nightmare. And still, even as their city burned and their citizens transformed, people continue to seek out blood ministration. Because it still worked, you see. It still healed. It still granted strength and vitality. The promise of the blood was real, even if the price was unspeakable. So people made the same choice the church had made. They gambled that they would be different, that they would be the ones who benefited without paying the cost. They were wrong almost every time. But hope, however irrational, is a powerful thing, and the Healing Church was very good at selling hope, even as they drowned the city in blood. Chapter 4: The Choir and the Orphanage. While the Scourge of Beasts ravaged the lower streets of Yharnam, high above in the upper cathedral ward, the elite of the Healing Church pursued a different path entirely. They called themselves the Choir, and they believed they could achieve what Laurence had attempted but failed to accomplish: true communion with the Great Ones, true ascension beyond human limitations, without the degradation into beasthood. The choir represented the intellectual elite of the Healing Church, scholars and clergy who had proven themselves worthy of the deepest secrets. They occupied the upper cathedral ward, a district sealed off from the rest of Yharnam, accessible only to those with the highest clearance. Here, in soaring Gothic architecture that reached toward the heavens as if trying to touch the cosmos itself, the choir conducted their most ambitious experiments. Their philosophy differed from the approach that had created the Scourge. Where blood ministration focused on the physical properties of the old blood, the choir sought understanding, communion, and transcendence through a more spiritual approach. They believed, like Master Willem before them, that the path to ascension lay in gaining eyes, in achieving the insight necessary to perceive and commune with the Great Ones on their own terms. But the choir needed subjects for their experiments, and this is where their story becomes particularly dark. The Healing Church operated an orphanage. Officially, it was an act of charity, caring for the children of Yharnam who had lost their parents to the Scourge or other tragedies. In reality, the orphanage served as a source of experimental subject for the choir. Children, after all, were ideal for their purposes. Their minds were more flexible, more receptive to the kind of cosmic indoctrination the choir sought to achieve, and if the experiments failed, well, the children were already orphans. They had no families to ask questions or demand accountability. The choir's experiments focused on exposing these children to fragments of the Great One's presence, trying to force their evolution, trying to grant them the eyes and insight necessary to bridge the gap between human and cosmic consciousness. They fed the children carefully measured doses of particular types of old blood. They performed procedures we can only imagine judging by the results. Most of the children died or went mad, but some underwent a transformation that the choir considered successful. These children became celestial emissaries, beings that were no longer quite human but hadn't devolved into beasts either. They had transcended in a different direction, becoming something closer to the Great Ones themselves, at least in form if not in actual power or consciousness. The celestial emissaries you encounter in the game are grotesque and tragic. Tall, pale, bulbous-headed creatures covered in a blue-grey skin that seems neither fully solid nor fully material. They move with an otherworldly grace, wielding cosmic powers, but they're still fundamentally victims. They were children once before the choir's experiments transformed them into something else entirely. The choir considered these transformations successful because the emissaries hadn't become beasts. They had evolved upward rather than downward. But any objective assessment reveals the horrible truth. The choir was murdering children through experimentation, and the few survivors were transformed into inhuman creatures, their original personalities and identities completely erased. Yet the choir's greatest achievement and their greatest discovery wasn't something they created. It was something they found. Deep beneath the Grand Cathedral, in the lowest reaches of the Upper Cathedral Ward, in a place called the Altar of Despair, the choir made contact with Ebrietas, daughter of the Cosmos. This was the same Great One that scholars of Byrgenwerth had discovered years before, but the choir had been granted special access to her, possibly as part of the Church's schism with Byrgenwerth, possibly through conquest or theft of knowledge. Ebrietas is unique among the Great Ones we encounter. She's passive, almost gentle in her demeanour when you first find her. She seems to be mourning, kneeling before the corpse of another being, possibly Rom, possibly another Great One. The lore is ambiguous. Ebrietas appears to be genuinely sorrowful, genuinely lonely, exhibiting an emotional depth that makes her more sympathetic than terrifying. The choir studied Ebrietas extensively. They communed with her, learning from her, seeking her guidance in their attempts to ascend. Ebrietas seemed willing to share her knowledge, or at least she didn't resist their communion. The choir learned to channel her cosmic power, to use it in their experiments. They developed special tools and weapons that channeled arcane energy derived from their communion with her. Through Ebrietas, the choir gained access to a special type of blood, not the typical old blood that caused beasthood, but something purer, more aligned with cosmic ascension. This blood, when properly administered and combined with the right rituals, could theoretically allow someone to evolve beyond human limitations without the risk of beastly transformation. But there was a problem, one that the choir either didn't understand or chose to ignore. The Great Ones, including Ebrietas, are fundamentally alien. Their thought processes, their perceptions, their very existence operates on principles incomprehensible to human consciousness. To truly commune with them, to truly gain the insight necessary to perceive them and understand them, requires human mind to expand in ways it wasn't designed to expand. The result is madness. Not the animalistic fury of beasthood, but something perhaps worse, a fracturing of consciousness, a dissolution of the self, an awareness of realities that human minds cannot process without breaking. The choir members who achieved the highest levels of communion with Ebrietas didn't become beasts true, but they didn't remain human either, not in any meaningful sense. They became something lost, something adrift in cosmic currents, their humanity subsumed by the very transcendence they sought. The Upper Cathedral Ward, by the time we explore it in the game, has become a monument to the choir's failure. The grand halls are dark and empty. The experiments have been abandoned. The celestial emissaries wander aimlessly, purposeless, their creator-tormentors long gone. Ebrietas remains in her chamber, still mourning, still alone, surrounded by the corpses of those who sought to use her knowledge. The choir's story is one of hubris disguised as enlightenment. They believed they could achieve what Laurence couldn't, that they could reach the heights without falling into the depths. They saw themselves as nobler than the crude blood ministration of the lower church, more refined in their approach, but their methods were just as cruel, their results just as tragic, their victims just as numerous. The children of the orphanage paid the price for the choir's ambition. Those who survived as celestial emissaries are arguably worse off than those who simply died. They exist in a state of limbo, not human, not truly great ones, not even fully conscious in the way we understand consciousness. They're living failures, monuments to misguided experimentation, and the choir themselves, those who achieve their highest goal of communion with the great ones, they discovered too late that transcendence comes with a cost. You cannot stare into the abyss of cosmic truth without the abyss staring back. You cannot gain eyes on the inside without losing something fundamental on the outside. Your humanity, your sanity, your sense of self. The choir believed they were ascending to heaven, reaching for the stars, touching the divine. In reality, they were drowning in an ocean of cosmic indifference, their consciousness dissolving like salt in water, their identities erased by contact with minds so vast and so alien that human personality cannot withstand the experience. This is the tragedy at the heart of Bloodborne's narrative. The pursuit of transcendence, whether through blood or insight, through beasts or cosmos, inevitably destroys those who pursue it. There is no safe path to godhood. There is no method of ascension that doesn't exact a terrible price. The Thumerians learned this lesson. The healing church learned it. The choir learned it. And still, in the face of all this evidence, humans keep trying, keep seeking, keep sacrificing themselves and others in the futile hope that they'll be different, that they'll be the ones who succeed where all others failed. Before we continue deeper into this tale, I want to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you for choosing to spend your time here listening to this story. Whether you're still wide awake, hanging on every word, or drifting in that pleasant space between consciousness and sleep, I appreciate you being here. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Bloodborne's lore, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing to the channel. It helps more than you might think, and it lets me know that these long-form lore explorations are valuable to you. And if you have a favourite Bloodborne character or area you'd love to hear more about, leave a comment. I read them all, and they often inspire future videos. Let's continue. Chapter 5. The Hunters and Their Dream. Every tragedy needs its soldiers, its warriors who fight on the front lines even as the war itself becomes increasingly meaningless. In Bloodborne, those soldiers are the hunters, men and women who take up specialized weapons and venture into the night to kill beasts. But the story of the hunters is far more complex and tragic than simple monster slayers. It's a story of servitude, of dreams and nightmares, and of a cycle that perpetuates itself across time. Let's begin with the first hunter, Gehrman. Gehrman was not the first person to kill beasts. That dubious honour likely belongs to nameless warriors from the early days of the Scourge. But Gehrman was the first to systematise it, to turn beast hunting from desperate survival into an art form, a discipline, a profession. He was a craftsman of extraordinary skill, a warrior of unparalleled ability, and ultimately a tragic figure bound to a dream he can never escape. In the early days of the Healing Church, when the Scourge first began to manifest, Gehrman was recruited to deal with the problem. he developed the first trick weapons, those ingenious transforming armaments that define Bloodborne's combat. His signature weapon, the Burial Blade, an enormous curved scythe that could fold into a smaller blade and back again, became legendary. He trained the first generation of hunters, establishing techniques and principles that would be followed for years to come. Gehrman established the first hunters' workshop, a place where hunters could gather, share knowledge, maintain their weapons, and prepare for the hunt. The workshop became an institution, a brotherhood of warriors united by their grim duty. They were heroes, in the eyes of Yharnam's citizens, brave souls who ventured into the night to protect the innocent from monsters. But Gehrman's story took a dark turn through his involvement with the Healing Church, and more specifically, through his association with a figure named Laurence, and through the influence of the Great Ones. You see, Gehrman loved someone, a hunter named Maria. Lady Maria was one of Gehrman's most skilled students, a warrior of extraordinary grace and deadly precision. She wielded a special weapon, the rakuyo, with unmatched skill. But Maria would eventually leave the hunt, abandoning her role for reasons connected to the atrocities committed at the Fishing Hamlet, but will return to her story soon. Maria's departure devastated Gehrman. In his grief and loneliness, he created a doll in her likeness, an articulated figure that resembled Maria in appearance if not in spirit. This doll would become significant in ways Gehrman couldn't have anticipated. Gehrman's involvement with Laurence and the Healing Church led him into contact with the Great Ones, and one Great One in particular took an interest in him, or perhaps Gehrman made a bargain he couldn't refuse. The result was the creation of the Hunter's Dream. The Hunter's Dream is a pocket dimension, a liminal space that exists between the waking world and the nightmare realms. It appears as an ethereal version of the old workshop, surrounded by flowers and bathed in eternal twilight. Time moves differently there, or perhaps doesn't move at all, and in this dream, Gehrman was trapped. Trapped isn't quite the right word. Bound might be better. Gehrman became the host of the dream, its caretaker, doomed to guide new hunters who were brought into this space. The doll he had created in Maria's image was animated by some force, whether by a Great One's power or by some fragment of Maria's own spirit is ambiguous, and became a companion to both Gehrman and the hunters who would enter the dream. The purpose of the Hunter's Dream is sinister in its elegance. It allows hunters to die and return, to resurrect after each death, making them effectively immortal for the duration of the hunt. When a hunter dies in the waking world, they awaken in the dream, restored, ready to try again. This makes them perfect servants for an endless hunt, warriors who can throw themselves against impossible odds again and again without permanent loss. But this resurrection comes at a cost. The hunters bound to the dream lose their connection to normal life. They can't truly rest. They can't escape. They're caught in a cycle of hunting, dying and hunting again, serving the dream's purpose, which is ultimately to serve the Great One who created or sustains the dream. Gehrman himself is both prisoner and warden of this system. He sits in his wheelchair in the dream, aging but never dying, aware of his servitude but unable to escape it. When he speaks to the hunter, the player character, there's a profound sadness in his words. He offers advice, he offers encouragement, but underneath it all is the weariness of someone who has been trapped for an unbearably long time. The doll serves as a gentler presence in the dream. She's kind to the hunters, tending to them, caring for them, speaking to them with warmth and compassion. But she's also not quite real, or perhaps she's more real than she appears. She refers to the hunters as good hunter with genuine affection. She seems to possess some autonomy, some fragment of will or consciousness that makes her more than a mere construct. Whether this comes from Maria's influence or from the Great One's power or from something else entirely remains one of Bloodborne's beautiful ambiguities. The hunter's dream also contains messengers, small, pale, childlike creatures with grotesque features who serve various functions. They hold your items, they wave to you from their graves, they appear throughout the dream offering strange assistance. These messengers are another mystery. Are they the spirits of dead children, perhaps victims of the Church's experiments? Are they lesser creatures created by the Great Ones? The game never explicitly tells us, leaving them as eerie, helpful presences whose true nature remains obscure. But let's return to the broader story of the hunters themselves, beyond just Gehrman and the dream. After Gehrman established the first workshop and the traditions of the hunt, other hunters rose to prominence, each adding their own techniques and approaches to the profession. Ludwig was perhaps the most famous hunter after Gehrman himself. Ludwig the Holy Blade was a church hunter, devoted to the healing church's cause, who believed deeply in the righteousness of the hunt. He was a knight in all but name, wielding his iconic holy moonlight sword, a weapon of pure arcane energy that he received through communion with the Great Ones. Ludwig founded the Healing Church Hunters as an organisation, creating a more formal structure for beast hunting under the Church's authority. Ludwig was beloved by the common people. He was their protector, their champion, the symbol of hope that the hunt could be won. His tactics emphasised straightforward combat, holy purpose, and unwavering courage. He inspired an entire generation of hunters who followed his example. But Ludwig's story, like so many others, ends in tragedy. The same blood that gave hunters their strength and speed also made them susceptible to the scourge. Ludwig, despite his purity of purpose, despite his holy conviction, eventually succumbed to the transformation. He became a beast, a horrific equine monstrosity that haunted the hunter's nightmare, a grotesque mockery of the noble knight he once was. Even in his beast form, some fragment of Ludwig's consciousness remained, enough to recognise his beloved sword when shown to him, enough to experience one final moment of lucidity before death. Other hunters had different approaches. The powder kegs, mentioned earlier, specialised in overwhelming firepower and explosive weapons. They were the artillerymen of the hunt, more interested in blasting beasts apart than in the elegant swordplay of traditional hunting. Their most famous creation was the stake driver, a pile driver weapon that delivered devastating explosive punches. They were also responsible for the burning of Old Yharnam, executing the Healing Church's brutal scorched earth policy. Some hunters went rogue, abandoning the structure of the workshops and the church to hunt on their own terms. These independent hunters often developed their own unique styles and weapons. Jura, who we mentioned before, became a protector of beasts rather than their killer. Eileen the Crow became a hunter of hunters, a specialist who tracked down hunters who had become blood drunk and lost themselves to the violence of the hunt. This phenomenon, hunters becoming blood drunk, represents another facet of the tragedy. The same blood that empowered hunters also addicted them to violence. The thrill of the hunt, the rush of combat, the intoxication of blood. All of these could corrupt a hunter's purpose. They would begin hunting not to protect people, but for the sheer pleasure of killing. They would become as dangerous as the beast they hunted, sometimes more so. Blood-drunk hunters had to be put down, and the task fell to specialists like Eileen. Her title, Hunter of Hunters, is one of the saddest in the game because it acknowledges an inevitable truth. The hunters themselves would eventually become part of the problem they were created to solve. As the scourge worsened and the hunt became more desperate, the workshops splintered. The first workshop, Gehrman's original, was eventually abandoned. A second workshop was established, but it too fell into decline. By the time of the game's events, the hunt has become decentralized, chaotic, with various factions and individuals all pursuing their own agendas. The Healing Church still officially oversees the hunt, but their control has weakened. Hunters operate with increasing independence, and the line between hunter and beast, between protector and monster, has become dangerously blurred. And over it all, the hunter's dream persists, pulling in new hunters, binding them to its service, perpetuating the cycle. Gehrman remains trapped, offering his grim guidance to each new arrival. The doll continues her gentle ministrations, caring for hunters who can never truly rest. The messengers wave from their graves, eternally present, eternally strange. The hunt continues because the hunt must continue. Not because it's solving anything. The scourge isn't being cured, Yharnam isn't being saved, but because the system has become self-perpetuating. The hunters hunt because they're hunters. The dream sustains them because that's its purpose, and the great ones watch, indifferent to the suffering their influence has created, concerned only with their own inscrutable desires. This is the prison that Gehrman inhabits. This is the curse that has consumed the hunters. And this is the cycle that the player character, the good hunter, steps into when the game begins. A cycle that has been turning for decades, grinding up countless souls, achieving nothing but its own perpetuation. Chapter 6: The Fishing Hamlet and the Sin of Kos. Now we must journey to the coast, to a small fishing hamlet by the sea, because it's here that perhaps the original sin of Bloodborne was committed. If the Healing Church's use of the old blood was a mistake born of ambition, the events at the fishing hamlet were a deliberate atrocity, a conscious evil that would curse generations of hunters and bind them to a nightmare from which there is no escape. The fishing hamlet was a small coastal village, isolated and primitive by Yharnam standards. Its people lived simple lives, fishing the waters, worshipping the ocean, and maintaining traditions that stretched back beyond memory. They were, by all accounts, peaceful, humble folk who wanted nothing more than to be left alone. But the hamlet held a secret, or rather, the ocean near the hamlet held something extraordinary. Living in those waters was a great one, Kos, or as some say, Cosm. Kos was different from other great ones we encounter. She seemed to have a genuine relationship with the villagers, a kind of mutual respect or perhaps even affection. The villagers worshipped her, and in return Kos provided for them. She was their goddess, their protector, their provider. The villagers' relationship with Kos went deeper than mere worship. They incorporated elements of her being into their own lives. They wore shells and ocean-themed garments. Some of them bore parasites, creatures that lived symbiotically within the villagers' bodies, granted to them by Kos. These parasites gave the villagers certain abilities, certain protections, certain connections to the cosmic force that Kos represented. This arrangement seemed to work. The villagers were content. Kos was content. The hamlet existed in relative isolation and peace, a small pocket of humanity living in harmony with a great one. Then the scholars of Byrgenwerth discovered it. Master Willem's scholars, in their endless search for knowledge of the Great Ones, eventually learned of the Fishing Hamlet and its unique relationship with Kos. They organised an expedition to the village, ostensibly to study this phenomenon, to learn from it, to understand how humans and Great Ones might coexist. Among those who went to the hamlet were some of the most skilled individuals associated with Byrgenwerth and the early healing church. Gehrman was there, Lady Maria was there, church officials were there, and their intentions, whatever they might have claimed, were not peaceful. What happened next is shown to us in fragments, in environmental storytelling, in the nightmarish recreation of the hamlet that exists in the hunter's nightmare. The scholars didn't come to learn from the villagers, they came to take what they wanted. They came to extract knowledge, to acquire samples, to dissect and study. And they didn't care what violence was necessary to achieve these goals. The expedition became a massacre. The villagers were killed. Men, women and children, all slaughtered by the scholars and hunters who had come to their isolated hamlet. Those who weren't killed outright were subjected to experiments, vivisections, studies that treated them as specimens rather than people. The parasites within their bodies were extracted and studied. The village was pillaged for anything of value, any knowledge that could be gained. But the true atrocity was what they did to Kos herself. Kos had washed up on the shore of the hamlet. Whether she was dead or dying before the scholars arrived is ambiguous, but her body was there, massive and otherworldly, a great one rendered vulnerable. The scholars descended upon her corpse like scavengers. They cut into her. They extracted samples. They dissected her, seeking to understand her biology, her power, her essence. And Kos was pregnant. Inside her body was a child, the orphan of Kos. The scholar's violation of Kos's corpse was also a violation of her unborn child. Whether they extracted the orphan, or whether it emerged on its own after Kos's death, the result was the same: a Great One's child, orphaned, traumatized, bound to its mother's violated corpse. This act, the murder of the villagers, the desecration of Kos, the orphaning of her child, created a curse that would echo through time. Great Ones remember, seek children, they yearn for offspring. The fact that humanity murdered a Great One and orphaned her child represents perhaps the greatest sin possible against these cosmic entities. Lady Maria was deeply affected by what happened at the Fishing Hamlet. She had participated in the violence, had shed blood in that cursed place, and the guilt destroyed something fundamental in her. She cast her weapon, the Rokuyo, into the well of the hamlet, symbolically rejecting the hunt and all it represented. She returned to Yharnam and eventually took a position at the research hall, working with the patients there, perhaps seeking some form of redemption through care of other victims. But redemption was impossible. The curse of the Fishing Hamlet followed Maria. It followed Gehrman. It followed every hunter who'd been present at that massacre, and eventually it followed all hunters forever and ever, binding them to a nightmare. The hunter's nightmare is a realm that exists parallel to the hunter's dream, a dark mirror of that twilight garden. Where the dream is peaceful and melancholy, the nightmare is violent and tormented. It's a place where hunters who have been particularly cruel, particularly blood-drunk, or particularly tainted by the sin of the Fishing Hamlet are dragged off to death. The hunter's nightmare is eternal suffering, Hunters trapped there hunt endlessly in a twisted recreation of Yharnam and the hamlet. They kill beasts, they kill each other, they die and resurrect and hunt again, forever, with no purpose and no escape. The nightmare is populated by the worst examples of what the hunt created: blood-drunk maniacs, transformed monsters, and the spectral remnants of those who'd committed unforgivable sins. And at the heart of the hunter's nightmare, at the very bottom of this hell, is the fishing hamlet itself, recreated in nightmarish form. The village appears as it did during the massacre, frozen in that moment of atrocity, with the villagers still present as twisted, vengeful shades. They attack any hunter who enters, their forms warped by death and rage and the unnatural resurrection the nightmare has given them. And on the shore, Cos's corpse still lies, massive and rotting, a constant reminder of the sin that created this place. The orphan of Kos remains as well, but it has grown, or rather, it has manifested in its true form. The orphan is one of the most tragic boss fights in the game. It emerges from Kos's corpse, shrieking with rage and pain, wielding a makeshift weapon fashioned from its own placenta, attacking with feral desperation. The orphan isn't fighting to protect anything or to achieve any goal. It's simply expressing its trauma, its abandonment, its violation. It's the rage of a child who was never born properly, never held by its mother, never given the chance to exist peacefully. When you fight the orphan, you're not fighting evil, you're fighting pain. And when you kill it, if you kill it, the death is not triumphant. It's simply more tragedy piled onto tragedy. Lady Maria serves as a boss fight as well, found in the hunter's nightmare guarding the research hall and the path to the hamlet. She fights desperately to prevent anyone from reaching the hamlet, trying in death to protect a place she failed to protect in life. Her moveset is beautiful and deadly, incorporating her blood into her attacks in a way she would have abhorred in life, a sign of how the nightmare has corrupted even her attempt at redemption. When you defeat Maria and she dies her final death, her last words are a whisper about her failure, about her inability to protect those who needed her protection. Even in the nightmare, even given the chance to stand guard over the hamlet, she fails again. The tragedy is circular, eternal, inescapable. The curse of the fishing hamlet represents Bloodborne's statement on colonialism, on scientific exploitation, on the arrogance of those who believe their pursuit of knowledge justifies any atrocity. The scholars of Byrgenwerth believed they were advancing human understanding. They believed their research justified the cost. They were wrong, but by the time they realized their error, the damage was irreversible. The orphan's cry echoes through the nightmare, a sound of anguish that can never be soothed. Kos's corpse rots endlessly, a violation that can never be undone. The villagers haunt their own home, denied even the peace of proper death. And the hunters who participated in the massacre are bound forever to the nightmare, forced to witness and re-experience their sin for eternity. This is the price of the terrible things done in the name of progress, of knowledge, of advancement. This is what happens when humans treat other beings, whether human or cosmic, as mere resources to be exploited. The curse of Kos is justice of a sort, but it's a justice that brings no satisfaction, no closure, no redemption. It's simply suffering answering suffering, violence answering violence, in an endless cycle that benefits no one. And the saddest part? The knowledge gained from the fishing hamlet, the secrets extracted from Kos and her villagers, contributed to the creation of the healing church, to blood ministration, to the entire system that would doom Yharnam. The sin at the hamlet wasn't an isolated incident. It was the foundation upon which everything else was built. Chapter 7: Cainhurst Castle and the Vilebloods. While the healing church dominated Yharnam with their blood ministration and their hunts, not everyone accepted their authority. Far from the city, isolated in the frozen mountains, stood Cainhurst Castle, an ancient noble estate that housed a rival faction with their own approach to the power of blood. This is the story of the Vilebloods, of forbidden knowledge, and of a queen who refused to bow to the church's dominance. Cainhurst Castle predates the healing church by a significant margin. It was the seat of an old noble family, aristocrats who had maintained their power and influence through generations. The castle itself is a Gothic masterpiece, all stone and ice, grand halls and towering spires, a monument to old-world nobility and ancient privilege. When the healing church rose to power and began their blood ministration, the nobles of Cainhurst were initially intrigued. They sought the old blood for themselves, believing that their noble lineage made them more suitable recipients than the common rabble of Yharnam. They wanted the power that blood offered, but on their own terms without subservience to the church. One of Byrgenwerth's scholars, a figure known only as the traitor in the church's accounts, brought forbidden knowledge to Cainhurst. This individual, whose identity and motivations remain mysterious, shared secrets about blood with the nobles, secrets that the church had tried to keep exclusive. This gift of knowledge transformed Cainhurst. The nobles of Cainhurst developed their own blood techniques, their own form of blood ministration that diverged from the church's methods. They discovered that blood could be used not just for healing or empowerment, but for something else entirely, a kind of vampirism, a way of taking strength directly from the blood of others. This is where the name Vilebloods comes from. The church branded them as practitioners of vile blood arts, as corrupters who perverted the sacred practice of blood ministration. But from the Vilebloods' perspective, they were simply exploring a different application of the same power. Why should the church have a monopoly on blood's potential? The Vilebloods were led by Queen Annalise, a figure of eternal beauty and terrible power. Annalise is one of the most enigmatic characters in Bloodborne's lore. She sits on her throne in Cainhurst, immortal, unchanging, her beauty preserved through the power of her blood. She speaks with aristocratic elegance, treating all who approach her with courtly grace, yet there's something deeply unsettling about her. Annalise seeks a very specific goal, one that ties directly into the broader themes of Bloodborne. She wants to bear a child of blood. Not a normal child, but something more, a being that would represent the perfection of the vile blood arts. She seeks what she calls a child of blood, and she invites worthy individuals to become her knights, to bring her dregs, the remnants of blood from the powerful, in service of this goal. The sexual and reproductive undertones in Annalise's quest mirror the Great One's own desire for children. Just as the Great Ones yearn for offspring, so too does this mortal queen seek to bear something extraordinary. Whether she seeks to create a human child, or something that would rival the Great Ones themselves, or something else entirely, is never made fully clear. What is clear is that her quest represents another form of the same ambition that dooms everyone else in the story, the desire to transcend human limitations through blood. the Vilebloods developed their own unique practices and culture around blood. They mastered techniques for absorbing the blood of their enemies, for using blood as a weapon directly. Their fighting style is elegant and savage simultaneously, befitting their noble heritage and their vampiric nature. The Shikaj, a katana that transforms into a blood-fueled weapon, exemplifies their approach, beauty and death intertwined. Cainhurst's knights were formidable warriors, and as the Vilebloods grew in power and influence, they began to pose a real threat to the Healing Church's authority. Here was a rival faction also using the old blood, but refusing to submit to church doctrine. More than that, the Vilebloods actively mocked the church, seeing them as pretentious upstarts trying to claim exclusive rights to knowledge that should be shared among the worthy. The Healing Church could not tolerate this challenge. They couldn't allow an alternative source of blood power to exist, couldn't permit anyone to suggest that there were other paths besides submission to church authority. So they dispatched a force to deal with Cainhurst permanently. This force was led by Martyr Ligarius, a fanatic devoted to the church's cause. Ligarius and his executioners, warriors specifically trained to hunt and kill Vilebloods, laid siege to Cainhurst Castle. The battle was brutal. The executioners fought their way through the castle, killing every Vileblood they encountered. The nobility of Cainhurst, for all their power and skill, could not withstand a coordinated assault by church-backed warriors who fought with religious fervour. The castle's halls ran red with blood. Ironic, given that blood was what everyone was fighting over. But Ligarius's mission had a specific goal beyond mere slaughter. He sought to ensure that the Vilebloods could never return, that their knowledge would be sealed away forever. After killing most of the inhabitants of Cainhurst, Ligarius placed a magical seal on the throne room where Queen Annalise resided, preventing anyone from entering or leaving. Then, having completed his mission, Ligarius sat down on the roof of Cainhurst Castle and waited, and waited, and waited. Years passed, decades passed, and still Ligarius maintained his vigil, his body slowly dying, decaying, turning into little more than an animated corpse, but his will never wavering. He would guard the seal he had placed. He would ensure no one reached the queen. Ligarius became what the game calls a martyr, someone who suffered and died for their faith, but whose conviction was so strong that death itself couldn't stop him. When you encounter him in the game, he's barely human anymore, a skeletal figure in tattered robes, still wielding his wheel and sword, still determined to fulfill his oath. But Ligarius, for all his dedication, failed in one crucial respect. Queen Annalise survived. Behind the seal, in her throne room, Annalise endured. The seal prevented anyone from reaching her, but it also preserved her, kept her safe from further attack. She sat on her throne, immortal, unchanging, waiting for someone who might eventually break the seal and free her. She waits there still, in the game's present, her court dead, her knights scattered, her grand ambitions reduced to the hope that someone, anyone, might arrive to continue her bloodline's work. The tragedy of Cainhurst is that they weren't really wrong. Their approach to blood wasn't inherently more evil than the church's. It was simply different. The church used blood to heal and empower, and accidentally turned people into beasts. The Vilebloods used blood to steal life force from others, and perhaps risk creating something equally monstrous. Neither approach was right in any absolute sense, but the church had more power, more resources, and more willingness to commit genocide to maintain their monopoly. Cainhurst Castle stands as a frozen monument to this conflict. The grand halls are empty now, patrolled only by ghosts and lingering spirits. The library contains tomes of forbidden knowledge that no one reads. The portrait gallery displays nobles who are all dead. The throne room holds a queen who has outlived her kingdom. And yet, Annalise persists. Even after everything, after the siege, after the death of all her subjects, after decades of isolation, she maintains her dignity, her purpose, her dream of bearing a child of blood. Whether this makes her admirably determined or tragically delusional is left for the player to decide. The Vilebloods story adds another layer to Bloodborne's examination of ambition and blood. They show that the healing church wasn't unique in their hubris, that the desire to transcend human limitations through blood existed across different factions and philosophies. The church didn't have a monopoly on mistakes. They simply had the power to suppress anyone else who made similar mistakes. And in the end, both factions, church and Vilebloods, failed to achieve their true goals. The church couldn't cure the scourge they created. The Vilebloods couldn't produce their child of blood. Both sought transcendence, both paid terrible prices, and both ultimately accomplished nothing but suffering. Annalise still waits on her throne. Ligarius still guards his seal. Even in death, the castle still stands, frozen and empty. And the cycle continues because no one, not church, not Vilebloods, not anyone, has learned the real lesson that the power they seek cannot be controlled and the transcendence they desire cannot be safely achieved. Chapter 8: The Mensis Ritual and the Nightmare. Among all the factions pursuing communion with the Great Ones, none went further or fell harder than the School of Mensis. This group, led by a scholar named Mikolash, represents the final extreme of humanity's attempt to force contact with cosmic entities, and the catastrophic consequences when that contact succeeds. The School of Mensis was originally part of the Healing Church's scholarly community, but they broke away to pursue their own radical approach to achieving communion with the Great Ones. Where the choir sought gradual ascension through blood and ritual, Mensis wanted immediate direct contact. They wanted to speak to the Great Ones face to face, to force an audience with cosmic entities, to demand the transcendence that others merely hoped for. Mikolash, the host of the Nightmare, was a brilliant scholar and a complete madman. Though whether he was mad before the ritual or became mad because of it is unclear. He led the School of Mensis in their most ambitious project, a ritual designed to contact a Great One and bring its consciousness into direct communion with human minds. Their target was Murgo, an infant Great One, offspring of Queen Yharnam from the Ancient Pthumerian Civilization. Murgo is one of the most tragic and mysterious figures in Bloodborne's lore. An infant Great One, possibly stillborn or possibly murdered, Murgo exists in a state between life and death, presence and absence. You never see Murgo directly in the game, only a crib, only cries, only the suggestion of existence. Whether Murgo truly exists in any meaningful sense or is simply an echo, a memory, a ghost of a Great One, is deliberately ambiguous. The School of Mensis devised their ritual carefully. They would use a special artifact, the Mensis Cage, a strange lattice worn on the head, to open their minds to cosmic frequencies. They would perform the ritual together, all the scholars of Mensis participating, their consciousnesses synchronized, reaching out in unison toward Murgo. They succeeded. Contact was made. The barrier between human consciousness and cosmic awareness was breached. Murgo's presence flooded into the minds of the Mensis scholars, and they achieved exactly what they sought: direct communion with a Great One. It destroyed them completely. The human mind is not designed to contain cosmic consciousness. The scholars of Mensis, their minds open to Murgo's presence, simply couldn't withstand the experience. Their consciousness is shattered, fractured, dissolved. Their bodies remained, but everything that made them who they were was effectively erased, replaced by an overwhelming awareness of something utterly incomprehensible. But worse than their personal destruction was what the ritual created: the Nightmare of Mensis. The Nightmare of Mensis is one of several nightmare realms that exist parallel to reality in Bloodborne's cosmology. It's a hellscape, a dimension of impossible geometry and cosmic horror, built from the broken minds of the Mensis scholars and sustained by Murgo's presence. The nightmare is a place of madness made manifest, where the laws of physics become suggestions and the landscape itself seems to be in pain. At the heart of the Nightmare of Mensis sits something called the Brain of Mensis, though whether it's actually a brain or simply something that appears that way to human perception is unclear. This massive pulsating organ hangs in the void, constantly visible from various points in the nightmare, watching with hundreds of eyes, exuding a presence that causes frenzy in anyone who looks at it too long. The brain represents the collective consciousness of the Mensis scholars, or perhaps it's a manifestation of Murgo's presence, or perhaps it's both, the fusion of human and cosmic awareness that the ritual created. Looking at it causes frenzy, a game mechanic that represents the human mind breaking down from exposure to cosmic truth. The brain doesn't attack you directly, it simply exists, and its existence is weapon enough. Micolash himself exists in a strange state within the nightmare. When you encounter him, he's simultaneously alive and dead, present and absent. He runs through the halls of the nightmare, leading you on a chase through impossible architecture, rambling about eyes and insight, and the secrets he's learned. His dialogue is fragmented, repetitive, cycling through phrases about lining one's brain with the eyes, about Kos, about the cosmos. Micolash has achieved what he sought: communion with a Great One, understanding of cosmic truth. And it has reduced him to a babbling ghost, trapped in a nightmare of his own creation, unable to escape, unable to truly die, but also unable to exist in any meaningful way. He's a cautionary tale made flesh, a demonstration of what happens when humanity successfully achieves its grandest ambition. The boss fight against Micolash is frustrating and strange, much like his character. He runs away, he uses cheap tactics, he spams powerful spells. Fighting him doesn't feel heroic. It feels like putting down a mad dog, like Mercy killing someone who should have died long ago. And when he finally falls, there's no triumph, just the sad confirmation that he was already long gone before you ever arrived. At the deepest point of the Nightmare of Mensis, you find Murgo's loft, a quiet, almost peaceful area that stands in stark contrast to the chaos of the nightmare around it. Here is Murgo's crib, Murgo's wet nurse, a boss entity that protects the infant Great One, and the sound of Murgo's crying, a plaintive wail that echoes through the realm. Murgo's wet nurse is one of Bloodborne's most unsettling boss encounters. It's a tall, skeletal figure draped in black robes, wielding multiple blades, moving with an eerie grace. It never speaks, never makes a sound beyond the rustle of its robes and the swish of its weapons. It simply defends Murgo, fulfilling its purpose as caretaker and guardian. The fight takes place in a circular arena under a blood moon, with Murgo's crying constant in the background. The atmosphere is oppressive, mournful, tragic. You're not fighting a villain, you're fighting a nursemaid trying to protect its charge. The wet nurse is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, serving the purpose for which it exists. When you defeat Murgo's wet nurse and approach the crib, Murgo's crying stops. The silence that follows is profound and deeply unsettling. What have you done? Have you killed an infant Great One? Have you released it from suffering? Have you silenced a cry that was keeping some cosmic balance intact? The game doesn't tell you. It simply presents you with silence where there was once crying and leaves you to interpret what that means. With Murgo silenced, the nightmare of Mensis begins to collapse, or at least to change. The ritual that created it loses its anchor. The scholars of Mensis, their grand ambition, their cosmic communion, all of it unravels, accomplishing nothing but the creation and destruction of a nightmare realm. The Mensis storyline represents the ultimate expression of humanity's fatal flaw in Bloodborne. The belief that cosmic truth can be grasped, that great ones can be understood, that transcendence can be forced through will and ritual. Micolash and his scholars reached further than anyone else, achieved more direct contact than any other faction, and paid the highest price for their success. They touched the cosmos, and the cosmos dissolved them. They achieved their dream, and their dream became a nightmare. They got exactly what they wanted, and it destroyed everything they were. The school of Mensis is gone. Micolash is a ghost in a nightmare. The scholars are reduced to mindless husks or worse. The brain of Mensis hangs in the void, a monument to failed ambition. Murgo may or may not still exist, may or may not have ever truly existed, and the nightmare persists, a wound in reality that may never fully heal. This is what awaits those who demand answers from the cosmos. Not enlightenment, not transcendence, but annihilation of the self, dissolution of identity, transformation into something that can no longer be called human in any meaningful sense. The Mensis scholars learn the secrets of the universe, and those secrets unmade them. Chapter 9. The Hunter's Journey, and 3 endings. Now we arrive at the story of the player character, the good hunter who awakens in Yharnam on a night unlike any other. You receive a blood ministration from a mysterious figure in a wheelchair. You're told to seek pale blood, and you awaken in the hunter's dream with no memory of how you got there. Your journey through Yharnam will take you through every level of this tragedy, every layer of corruption and cosmic horror, until finally you must make a choice that determines not just your fate, but the fate of the entire cycle. Your path takes you through the streets of Yharnam, where citizens have become a blood-drunk mob, killing anything that moves. You venture into the cathedral ward where the healing church maintains its crumbling authority. You explore the forbidden woods, the hidden villages, the nightmare realms. You descend into the chalice dungeons, walking the same paths the Thumerians walked thousands of years before. Along the way, you kill beasts. You kill humans who have become worse than beasts. You kill great ones and their servants. You consume their blood echoes, growing stronger, becoming more formidable. You gain insight through your encounters, your perception shifting, your awareness of the cosmic truth growing. and as your insight increases, the world changes around you. You begin to see things that were always there but invisible to normal perception. Amygdalas, spider-like great ones, appear clinging to the sides of buildings, present throughout Yharnam, watching everything. The doll in the hunter's dream, who seemed merely animated before, now greets you when you arrive, suggesting consciousness and awareness. The reality of Yharnam reveals itself as more complex, more layered, more horrifying than it initially appeared. Your quest leads you to consume 3 specific items called 1/3 of umbilical cord. These cords are pieces of umbilical tissue from great ones, or their attempted offspring, items of immense cosmic significance. There's one from the abandoned workshop, one from Iosefka's clinic where twisted experiments created a celestial child, one from Mergo after you silence their crying, and one from Ariana if you've been following her questline. These cords are crucial. They represent connection to the Great Ones, literal biological links to cosmic entities. Consuming 3 of them grants you a level of insight and cosmic awareness that fundamentally changes your nature. You become something more than human, something capable of perceiving and potentially resisting the Great One's influence. Your journey eventually leads you back to the hunter's dream, where Gehrman waits. The old man, who has guided you throughout your hunt, now offers you a choice that determines your ending. The first ending, the most straightforward, is submission. Gehrman offers to release you from the dream, to let you wake up and remember your time in Yharnam as nothing but a nightmare. If you accept, he stands from his wheelchair, reveals his enormous scythe, the burial blade, and attacks you. This is Gehrman's gift, a mercy killing. He fights you not out of malice but out of compassion, trying to grant you the release he himself can never have. If you lose to Gehrman or if you submit without fighting, the ending shows you waking up in Yharnam as morning arrives. The night of the hunt is over. You survived. You can return to your normal life. The doll wishes you well, encouraging you to go out and make the best of this life. It seems like a happy ending, but it's a lie, or at least a temporary reprieve. The scourge isn't cured. The Great Ones still exist. Another night of the hunt will come, and when it does, another hunter will be drawn into the dream to fight the same battles you fought. Gehrman returns to his wheelchair, waiting for the next arrival. The cycle continues. You've escaped, but nothing has changed. You've purchased your freedom through ignorance, agreeing to forget, to pretend the cosmic horror you experienced wasn't real. The second ending requires you to refuse Gehrman's offer and defeat him. When you do, something new appears in the dream. The presence that has been sustaining the dream all along manifests. This is the Moon Presence, a great one that has been using the hunter's dream to serve its own purposes. The Moon Presence descends from the sky, a pale, emaciated creature with too many limbs and a faceless head. It approaches you, embraces you, and the screen fades to white. When it returns, you're sitting in Gehrman's wheelchair. You've taken his place. You've become the new host of the dream, bound to guide future hunters, trapped in the same prison Gehrman inhabited for so long. The doll cares for you now as she once cared for Gehrman, speaking gently, mourning your fate even as she serves it. You've won your battle against Gehrman but lost the war against the system itself. You've simply become the next victim of the cycle, perpetuating it through your own captivity. This ending is darker than the first because it's more honest. You don't get to forget. You don't get to pretend everything is fine. You're stuck. forever, in service to a great one's inscrutable purpose, maintaining a dream that serves only to perpetuate an endless hunt. But there's a third ending, one that requires the most effort, the most insight, and results in the most radical outcome. If you've consumed 3/1/3 of umbilical cords before confronting Gehrman, something different happens when the moon presence attempts to embrace you. Instead of submitting to its power, you resist. The cosmic awareness you've gained, the fragments of Great One essence you've incorporated into yourself, allow you to withstand the moon presence's attempt to bind you. The moon presence, surprised, attacks you. The final boss fight of Bloodborne begins, not against a beast or a mad scholar, but against the Great One that has been orchestrating the hunter's dream all along. The fight is strange, almost melancholic. The moon presence doesn't seem particularly aggressive or evil. It simply is, and you are challenging it, disrupting its plans. When you defeat the moon presence, the truly remarkable transformation occurs. You collapse to the ground as the doll approaches. Your body begins to change, shifting, transforming into something new. You've consumed enough Great One essence, gained enough insight, transcended human limitations sufficiently that you undergo metamorphosis. You become a Great One yourself. Specifically, you become an infant Great One, a small, slug-like creature with a large head and pale skin, crying helplessly. The doll picks you up gently, cradling you, speaking to you with maternal affection. "Are you cold?" she asks, her voice full of tenderness. She's seen this before, perhaps, or she simply understands what's happened. She accepts you in your new form, promising to care for you. This ending is triumphant in a way. You've broken the cycle, defeated the moon presence, transcended humanity, but it's also profoundly unsettling. What have you become? Are you still you? Can an infant Great One possess human consciousness, human memories, human identity? Or have you simply traded one form of existence for another, becoming something alien and incomprehensible? The doll seems happy in her way. She finally has something to truly care for, a child to nurture. Perhaps this fulfills some purpose written into her by Gehrman, some echo of Maria's character, or some need the moon presence built into her. She rocks you gently as the sunrise illuminates the dream and the game ends. These three endings represent three different responses to Bloodborne's central question. What do you do when confronted with cosmic horror, with a system built on exploitation and blood, with powers beyond human comprehension? The first ending is denial, escape into ignorance, pretend it never happened, accept a comfortable lie. The second ending is martyrdom, take on the burden yourself, maintain the system even though it's broken, sacrifice yourself so others might have a chance. The third ending is transformation. If you can't defeat the system from within it, transcend it entirely, become something new, even if that new form is uncertain and potentially horrifying. None of these endings are purely happy. None represent an uncomplicated victory. Bloodborne doesn't offer simple solutions or clear moral victories. Instead, it presents choices that each carry profound implications and uncertain outcomes. The Good Hunter's journey through Yharnam is one of constant discovery, constant revelation of deeper horrors beneath surface horrors. Every question answered raises three more questions. Every secret uncovered reveals deeper secrets. And at the end, when you've seen everything, understood everything, you must choose what to do with that understanding. Do you reject it and flee? Do you accept it and become its servant? Or do you embrace it and transform into something that might, possibly, be able to change things? Though what you'll change and how is uncertain, because you're no longer human enough to understand human concerns. The hunter's journey is everyone's journey in Bloodborne, a descent into deeper and deeper truths, each more unsettling than the last, until finally you must decide whether to turn back, to surrender, or to go forward into the unknown. Conclusion. And so we reach the end of our long journey through Yharnam's blood-soaked streets, through ancient Pthumerian ruins, through nightmare realms and cosmic revelations. As you drift towards sleep, or perhaps you're already sleeping, these words becoming part of your dreams, let's reflect on what Bloodborne's story tells us about ambition, knowledge, and the price of transcendence. At its core, Bloodborne is a story about the danger of seeking answers that humanity isn't meant to find. Every faction in the game, the Thumerians, Byrgenwerth scholars, the Healing Church, the Choir, the School of Mensis, the Vilebloods, all seek the same thing, transcendence beyond human limitations, and every single one pays a terrible price for that ambition. This is cosmic horror in its purest form, the tradition established by H.P. Lovecraft and his contemporaries. The central premise of cosmic horror is that the universe is fundamentally indifferent to humanity, that there exist beings and truths so far beyond human comprehension that merely knowing about them drives people mad. The great ones in Bloodborne embody this perfectly. They're not evil in any meaningful sense, but they're so alien, so incomprehensible, that contact with them inevitably destroys human sanity and identity. But Bloodborne adds something to this tradition. It examines not just the horror of cosmic truth, but the arrogance of those who seek it. The game is deeply critical of institutional authority, of organized religion that prioritizes power over people, of academia that treats knowledge as justifying any atrocity. The Healing Church isn't evil because they're secretly worshipping demons. They're evil because they knowingly perpetuate a system that transforms people into monsters while pretending it's medicine. They're evil because they burned Old Yharnam. They're evil because they experimented on orphans. They're evil in very human, very recognizable ways. The Victorian Gothic setting reinforces this theme. Victorian England was an era of immense scientific progress and colonial expansion, of unprecedented confidence in human reason and human supremacy. It was also an era of terrible exploitation, of brutal colonialism, of rigid class hierarchies that treated some humans as inherently more valuable than others. Bloodborne's Yharnam reflects this perfectly. A city of gas lamps and grand cathedrals, of scientific achievement and religious authority, built on a foundation of exploitation and violence. The Fishing Hamlet storyline makes this explicit. The massacre of the villagers and the desecration of Kos directly parallel colonial atrocities, the way European powers justified violence against indigenous peoples in the name of progress and knowledge. The scholars of Byrgenwerth weren't monsters. They were educated, refined, probably saw themselves as good people, but they treated the villagers as resources to be exploited, specimens to be studied, obstacles to be removed. This is colonialism's fundamental evil, the dehumanization of others in service of your own advancement. Blood itself functions as a metaphor throughout the game. Its medicine, its power, its addiction, its corruption, its connection to the divine, it's the vector of plague. The old blood is everything everyone wants it to be, and the source of everything they fear. This ambiguity is crucial. Blood ministration genuinely works, genuinely heals, genuinely grants power. The healing church isn't lying about its benefits, but those benefits come with costs that the church downplays, hides, or outright denies. This mirrors real-world medical scandals, pharmaceutical crises, any situation where something beneficial also causes harm, and institutions choose profit or power over honesty. The church could have stopped blood ministration when the scourge appeared. They chose not to because it would mean losing their authority, admitting their mistake, surrendering their power. This is a very human evil. The evil of institutions protecting themselves at the expense of the people they claim to serve. The theme of reproduction and children runs throughout the story in ways both tragic and deeply unsettling. The Great Ones lose their children and seek surrogates. The church experiments on orphans. Queen Annalise seeks to bear a child of blood. Murgo is an infant Great One, present but somehow absent. Arianna gives birth to something cosmic and dies in the process. The orphan of Kos cries out for a mother who can never answer. Your potential final transformation is into an infant Great One yourself. What does this focus on reproduction and children mean? Perhaps it represents the ultimate ambition, not just personal transcendence, but the creation of something new, something that will carry forward beyond your own existence. Every parent wants their child to have a better life, to go further, to be more. The Great Ones, the Church, everyone in Bloodborne takes this universal desire to its absolute extreme, seeking to create not just better children but transcendent ones, divine ones, children who aren't fully human anymore. But every one of these attempts fails or produces something tragic. The orphans become celestial emissaries, robbed of normal childhood. Murgo exists in a state of death or non-being. The orphan of Kos is traumatized and orphaned. Arianna's child is a cosmic horror. Even your own transformation into an infant Great One is ambiguous at best. Have you achieved something miraculous or lost everything that made you who you were? The game seems to suggest that some things aren't meant to be forced, that there are limits to what ambition should pursue, that trying to create transcendent life inevitably involves violating something fundamental about the natural order. The endless cycle that traps so many characters speaks to Bloodborne's existential themes. Gehrman is trapped in the dream, serving as host for hunter after hunter. The hunters themselves are caught in a cycle of hunting, dying and hunting again. The nights of the hunt repeat endlessly. The scourge continues despite all efforts to stop it. Yharnam is stuck in a perpetual state of crisis that never resolves. This cyclical nature reflects both the gameplay loop of Souls games, dying and trying again, and a deeper philosophical point about the futility of struggling against cosmic forces. You can't permanently fix Yharnam because the problems are systemic, built into the foundation of the city and its relationship with the old blood. Individual heroism is meaningless against institutional corruption and cosmic indifference. Yet the game doesn't counsel complete nihilism. Your actions matter, even if they don't fix everything. The third ending, where you become a Great One yourself, suggests that transformation might be possible, that radical change in the nature of existence itself might offer a way forward. Whether this is true transcendence or just another form of tragedy is deliberately left ambiguous. The environmental storytelling deserves mention as well. Every item description, every NPC placement, every architectural detail adds to the narrative. Bloodborne trusts players to piece together the story themselves, to make connections, to interpret ambiguities. This approach makes the lore feel earned rather than given, and it allows for multiple valid interpretations of events. This ambiguity is a strength, not a weakness. Bloodborne doesn't provide simple answers because simple answers would be dishonest. The cosmic horror genre works precisely because of uncertainty, because of the gaps in understanding that leave room for dread to grow. If everything were explained explicitly, the mystery would evaporate and the horror would diminish. The game's influence on gaming culture has been substantial. It reinvigorated interest in cosmic horror in video games. It demonstrated that dark, complex narratives could work in action games without compromising gameplay. It created a community of lore hunters who spend thousands of hours piecing together details, debating interpretations, exploring every corner for hidden meanings. Bloodborne also represents director Hidetaka Miyazaki at his most refined as a storyteller. The themes he explored in Dark Souls, cycles of rise and fall, the futility of fighting entropy, the corrupting nature of power, are taken further here. The Victorian Gothic setting allows for more focused social commentary than Dark Souls' medieval fantasy. The cosmic horror elements add philosophical weight about humanity's place in an uncaring universe. The game is ultimately a tragedy. Nearly every character you meet is doomed. Nearly every ambition fails. Nearly every secret revealed is horrifying. Even victory is ambiguous at best. But it's a tragedy that feels meaningful, that has something to say about ambition, knowledge, power, and the costs we're willing to pay for transcendence. As you lie here, perhaps close to sleep now, letting these words wash over you, consider what Bloodborne tells us that's relevant to our own world. We live in an age of rapid technological advancement, of institutions that claim authority over truth, of systems that perpetuate themselves regardless of their human cost. We face questions about how far we should push the boundaries of knowledge, what costs are acceptable in pursuit of progress, when ambition becomes hubris. Bloodborne suggests caution. It suggests skepticism toward institutions that claim exclusive access to truth or healing. It suggests that some knowledge might not be worth the price of gaining it. It suggests that transcendence forced through violence and exploitation isn't transcendence at all, but just another form of corruption. But it also suggests that facing uncomfortable truths, even cosmic horrors, is better than living in comforting lies. The first ending, waking up and forgetting everything, is the most peaceful but also the most cowardly. Sometimes the bravest thing is to look at darkness directly, to acknowledge the terrible truths about the world and yourself, and to choose how to respond with eyes open. The doll's final words in the third ending resonate. Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world. Worth, value, meaning. These are human concerns, human ways of understanding existence. Whether you remain human or transform into something else, whether you escape the dream or become trapped in it, the question of your worth, what you value, what you stand for, what you're willing to sacrifice and what you refuse to compromise remains relevant. Bloodborne is a game about blood and beasts, about cosmic gods and Gothic horror, about Victorian streets and Lovecraftian nightmares. But it's also a game about choices made in the face of terrible options, about maintaining humanity in inhumane systems, about the price of progress and the cost of knowledge. May these words guide you gently into sleep, into dreams less troubled than the hunter's dream. May you find rest that Gehrman never found. May you wake refreshed, ready to face whatever hunts await you in your own world. Beasts of stress and fear, nightmares of doubt and uncertainty, cosmic horrors of an indifferent universe. But also remember, you have choices even in the darkest night. You can flee, you can fight, you can transform, you can maintain broken systems or break them entirely. You can seek comfortable lies or uncomfortable truths. Whatever you choose, choose consciously, with full awareness of the costs. Good night, good hunter. May the good blood guide your dreams, and should you wake, may you find your worth in the waking world, armed with the knowledge that even cosmic horror can be faced, can be fought, and perhaps, just perhaps, can be transcended. Sleep well. The hunt can wait until morning.